We have some time for clarifications. Mr. Zulkarnain.
Mr. Speaker, thank Minister for the clarifications and the statement, and I'm heartened by the work, the good work done by our SPS officers. As a volunteer with Yellow Ribbon Singapore, I have visited the prisons myself and spoke to some of the inmates. I have two clarifications. One on the food meals for our inmates, second on the mattresses. On the food, this is a point actually highlighted to me by a resident as well. There are 3 meals for inmates, one for breakfast at 7:30 a.m., lunch 12:30 p.m., and dinner at 6 p.m. For inmates who do not have visitors or family members who can provide the approved pre-packed snack packs from SPS, they would have no choice of any night snacks from the period of 7 p.m. to the following day breakfast. So would perhaps the prison be looking into providing at least some snacks for inmates who require them after 7:30 p.m. Second, on the mattresses, I totally agree with Minister on the security aspect for the hidden contraband risk. There is also the risk of flammability, I think, of the mattresses. And I quote from the US Consumer Product Safety in this regard that although there are fire retardant and protective fabric barriers that can be used, through any acts of vandalism, the material within the mattresses can be exposed and be used as a fire safety risk within the prison, posing safety risk for the inmates and our custodians. But in this regard, is MHA actually looking into actively any other materials that can be used as alternative besides the current bedding that is being used right now? Thank you.
We have been looking at alternative possible material for some time, and I don't think we have come across anything that we've seen as a possible substitute that can be used, but it is something that we continue to look at. Something that will meet the security requirements and will work in our climate, given that we don't do air conditioning, and that would be resistant to, or at least not become a source of a passing on disease. On snacks, we don't provide snacks. I think the meals that we provide are based on the recommendations by dietitians. Any additional amounts that people want, there is a canteen from which they can buy.
Dr. Tan Woo Meng.
I should mention that depending on behavior, good behavior allows you to certain privileges, including a food pack that you can redeem.
Dr. Tan.
I thank the Minister for his detailed statement. Some of my Clementi residents have asked about the ventilation of prison cells that the inmates stay in. Minister mentioned that there is natural and mechanical ventilation for these cells. Can I ask 2 questions? Firstly, what has been the prison services experience of COVID-19 in our prisons, especially compared with other jurisdictions? And secondly, has there been any review or study regarding the risk of transmission of airborne diseases within our prisons, especially in the COVID-19 era? Thank you.
All our prison institutions are installed with mechanical ventilation systems that provide they're designed to provide sufficient air ventilation into the cells, and they are designed to meet the required building standards. The air changes per hour, which is the number of times the total air volume in the cell is completely removed and replaced in an hour, is regularly monitored to ensure adequate ventilation. On COVID, the prisons is obviously a place where we needed to be careful because of the proximity and the amount of time people spend with each other. So prisons took it very seriously. I mean, I don't have the data here, but I gave you earlier that 94% of eligible inmates had been vaccinated. Generally, my recollection is that the spread of COVID in prisons was low, and the measures taken by prisons officers, it's not just the physical conditions, but the measures you take were quite adequate to help in that regard. Thank you.
Ms. Sylvia Lim.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Two clarifications for Minister. The first concerns rehabilitation, and this is in relation to those that are serving long jail terms, let's say 20 years or more. Can you confirm whether there's any guideline that the rehab programs or the reskilling programs will only be available to these long-term prisoners, perhaps much closer to their release date, maybe in the 1-2 years before release, or would they be available to these long-term prisoners even earlier than that? Second question is, earlier on he showed a picture of some cells for assisted living, which I believe are for prisoners who are aging. May I ask him if he's able to tell us what is the age of the oldest person currently in our prisons? Thank you.
As with the rest of society, on taking the second question, the general prison population is also aging. And so we find more people who need more help. But I cannot give you the precise answer. Perhaps can I ask Ms. Lim to file a PQ on both those questions that she has raised, and we can deal with them in detail.
Mr. Murali Pillai.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, I welcome the Honourable Minister's statement on the conditions of prisons. And as I hear him, it appears that there is a balance being struck between the austere conditions of prison and really at the end of the day, getting prisoners to be rehabilitated. And we heard about the commendable efforts put in by SPS to reduce recidivism. I have two questions. First is in relation to the Minister's decision to allow cameras into the prisons. Issues of prison conditions have been raised from time to time. May I just please ask what was the rationale in allowing cameras into prisons for the members of the public to see how the prison conditions, what the prison conditions are. Secondly is in relation to safety. The Honourable Minister mentioned that one reason for the austere conditions is for the safety of prisoners. The Honourable Minister spoke about the suicide rates comparative to other countries. How about assault rates comparative to other countries? How does the austere conditions allow the Singapore Prison Service to reduce opportunities for assaults? Thank you.
Let me deal with the second question first, assault rates. Now, I don't have the data, and this data is not easy to get because it's not as if prisons generally publish the assault rates. But my own understanding is that the assault rates in Singapore are generally much lower. And why it, in some ways, is a very reasons which, for example, were raised in the Roach case, that there is no privacy when one uses the toilet facilities. But a lot of assaults take place there too when you give the privacy. And the prisons, many prisons put prisoners together in a cell, right? Just depends on number of persons in a cell. But that's not the only reason. There's a whole set of infrastructure of factors. I spoke earlier about gangs in prisons. I spoke earlier about a hierarchy amongst prisoners. That's a very relevant factor for high assault rates. In Singapore, we don't allow any of that. Second, in Singapore, there is pretty continuous monitoring. Whether you're in the cell, you're outside the cell, with technology, there is a lot of monitoring going on. And as a result, prisons officers can intervene fairly quickly. It doesn't mean no assaults take place. Sometimes there are even grievous injuries because people can inflict injuries on each other very, very quickly. So you need the right intelligence. You need to know what's going on. You need to know that who is maneuvering against whom. You need all of that. And with the best will in the world and best intelligence, you cannot prevent every incident. But we keep it very low. And prisoners committing suicide, it's a big risk. You want to save them. So monitoring, no gangs, continuous engagement, rehab efforts. So I can mention many other factors. But our whole approach is very different. And I would say much more focused on trying to make sure that the prisoners are safe and that when they come out, they are hopefully in a better position when they went in. And that's the aim. We don't always succeed, but that's the aim. Now, why did we allow the cameras in prison? For all these years, it's a taboo. No one can go in, which is why I invited MPs to turn up as well. The approach we decided on was this, that people needed to understand how our prisons operate, what the conditions were. So let's be open about it. Let the cameras go in. Let them speak with the prisoners, inmates themselves. Let them speak with the prisons officers so that they understand our approach. And this statement, this debate, as it were, is part of that process. I think for us as a society, we want to set out our approach. This is how we do it, and this is why we do it. These are the reasons why we are doing what we're doing. And then if anyone has a different view, we can hear them in Parliament.
Mr. Vikram Nair.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'd like to thank the Minister for raising this topic in Parliament and for making it very clear that a big focus of the program is to rehabilitate prisoners. In line with this, I would like to ask whether prisoners are allowed access to newspapers, television, or the internet. And if so, whether there are any restrictions on this or any security considerations relating to this. Thank you.
I thank Mr. Nair for that question. The answer is yes, inmates do have access to newspapers and television programs. The newspapers would be made available after the prisons have gone through the newspapers, the contents, and they remove some content. They remove content which depicts or describes or may encourage violence, may encourage crime or other such conduct. For example, reports on rapes, reports on assaults, violence, those sorts of things are taken out. Because people read it, they might be, there is a sense that they might then be, inclined to engage in such conduct. We also remove articles which may incite social or racial or religious tension. So screening is done. Really, the approach is for safety and security. So the newspapers won't be current, what they get. Likewise, TV programs, not allowed for the same reason, because you can't sort of censor and then put it out. Yeah. I'm looking for the data in my earlier speech, going back to Mr. Pillay's question. I did give the data on assault rates. If I find it, I will mention it, but I think you can take it as on the record.
Order. End of ministerial statement.